This episode of Everyman's Arsenal podcast is proudly sponsored by Nocturn Industries. Introducing the Daisho Bridge, seamlessly connect two night vision monocles to create a powerful dual tube setup. And don't miss out on the Chimera, Nocturn's panoramic night vision goggles. Upgrade your night vision game at nocturnindustries.com and use discount code TLDCO. Nocturn Industries, lighting the night for Everyman's Arsenal. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Everyman's Arsenal podcast, a podcast dedicated to learning more about the products, the people behind the products you might see on the Thin Line Defense Co. YouTube channel, other social media influencers, folks that are into training. And today we have Joe Farewell from Farewell Firearms.
Stoked to be here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for being here with us. I was telling Joe a little bit beforehand, kind of how this all started. One of our viewers reached out to us on our Discord and shared your link and said, you got to get this guy on the podcast. So I'm very appreciative that I know you're traveling right now, that you're able to make time to sit down with me and talk to me today. That's awesome, man.
Well, when I'm on the road is actually one of the better times for me to do this, because when I'm at home, I'm dedicated to the family time, especially this time of evening. So this works out pretty effectively, where I got an Airbnb to myself. I'm out doing a training trip, and I can
Nice.
sit down and have a chat.
Yeah. So for those of you that for the viewers that may not know about Joe Farewell and Farewell Firearms Training and kind of what you do you mind talking a little bit about your background and kind of what got you into this line of work?
Sure. When I started out in shooting, it was kind of I grew up shooting. I grew up hunting and kind of going out to the little range and plinking. But then about when I was about 20, I started shooting competitively and got hooked into that. Then I went into the law enforcement field and spent 7 years in law enforcement. I got to do all the fun things, but at the same time, I was still competing. And I started teaching on the side so I could afford to compete. And anyone who's shot competitions before knows how expensive that sport is. So in order to afford my addiction, I was teaching classes on the side, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So let's see, about 5 years ago now, I stepped away from law enforcement and pursued teaching full time. So now I travel all over the world and get to teach some really cool people, civilians, law enforcement, military, um, all over the place, which is
That's awesome.
honestly the dream job, right? It's
Yeah.
literally living the dream.
So I didn't know that you do stuff internationally as well. Do you mind talking a little bit more about what you've done on the international field?
So my first international trip was 2019. I went to Sweden for Rifle World Shoot, and I
Oh,
went
cool.
there a couple weeks early. I had a friend over there. He hosted me. I did several classes in Sweden. I shot Rifle World Shoot. Then I went to Poland, taught a couple classes there. Shot a match in Poland, and then last year I actually went back over to Poland for shoot. We did 3 classes and their rifle nationals.
Wow.
A pretty cool event. And then this year I'll be going to Finland for Rifle World Shoot again.
Okay. Awesome, man. I think I've been in the law enforcement world for about 14 years myself. All of us on the Thin Line Defense Co channel are all prior military. A couple of us are current or former law enforcement. But one of the things that we've learned is to try to come at reviews kind of like a Joe Blow regular civilian. We're consumers as well. We purchase things that we love and we purchase things that we hate. And the idea behind the channel was sharing our honest thoughts. Not using our military background, not using our law enforcement background. And it's interesting because there's some people that have this belief that unless you're law enforcement or unless you're special forces, your opinion is invalid. Um, and and from what we've seen, like some of the guys that are some of the best shooters that I've ever met have never served in the military or not in law enforcement. I'm wondering if you've had similar experiences.
Oh, 100%. I mean, the best of the best aren't going to be someone who does a lot of things, right? So someone who can focus 100% on shooting, I'm not the best pistol shooter in the world because I'm a three gunner. I shoot three gun. I shoot rifle, pistol, and shotgun. Um, the best at anything is not going to be diverse in their focus, right? They're
Mhm.
going to be extremely focused on one aspect. I am focused on shooting as a whole, so I'm really good at rifle, pretty good at shotgun, pretty good at pistol, and I'm good at instructing because that's a passion of mine that I put a lot of work into. When you look at law enforcement, and I spent a lot of time in law enforcement, I had a focus in law enforcement as well. I went into the narcotics and gang side and really put a lot of effort into that, and that's where I excelled in that realm as well. Like I taught
Yeah.
classes on that, and I think that when most people think, oh, you're law enforcement or you're military, or even Navy SEAL, like they're like, oh, you must shoot really well. Well, the fact of the matter is shooting is a very small percentage of what those guys do. And as a law enforcement officer,
Yeah.
like most cops maybe train, at the maximum 6 to 10 times a year.
Yeah.
Max. Like in service training, you have all the regular stuff that you have to go to. Your in service trainings of diversity and bias based profiling and all
Yeah.
this other BS that you have to deal with. And, some of it's necessary, but the actual shooting part is so limited that unless they're out training on their own, they're only going to get maybe 6 times a year they're going to get any sort of training, and a lot of agencies are only going to train once a year, twice a year for qualifications, or that's all they're going to shoot.
Yeah.
So the reality of it is, and the military is the same thing. I'm actually up here working with special operations this week, and those some of the guys are really squared away dudes. They're the freaking solid operators, but some of them haven't shot in 2 months because they've been doing other schools. They've got
Yeah.
breaching and skydiving and all sorts of other shit that they have to deal with. So the
Right.
reality is they are not the best at shooting. The best at shooting, the people who are putting in work on shooting day in and day out, and that's your competitive shooters. Competitive shooters, there is no better shooter in the world than someone who is absolutely dedicated to the sport, and that's because they're living, breathing, and just saturated with shooting. And so
Yeah.
they're dry firing multiple times a week, five, six,
Yeah.
7 times a week. They're hitting the range 4 or 5 times a week. They're shooting matches multiple times a month. Like that's dedication, and it's immersion that you won't see anywhere else. And when you look at the way that the brain works, when you get immersed in, I'm sure you've heard like the 10,000 hour rule. The
Yeah.
10,000 hour rule is something that's obvious to a lot of people who've done any sort of brain development learning, right? Study that when you look at competition, if you want to get good at shooting, you need say 10,000 hours to get good at shooting. Well, you're not going to get that ever in law enforcement. It's just not going to
Yeah.
happen unless you're training outside of it. So I know when I was teaching, when I'm teaching regularly, I'm on the range, 5, 6 days a week. My ability goes through the roof because I'm immersed in it. I'm getting consistent reps. So I think that to answer your question, no, law enforcement, military are not the best shooters.
Yeah.
Uh, they may have
You
gotten
know,
some more training than other people have, but by and
sure.
large, it's not where it's at.
Yeah. I'm like my agency, we qual once a quarter. So that's our official, unless I go outside of my, and I think they're allowed to give me something like 200 additional rounds a quarter that I can go and shoot on my own. But
And that's
um,
not bad compared to a lot of agencies.
yeah, yeah, you're right. So I totally get that. Like, unless you're out practicing on your own, as a law enforcement officer, there's no way that you're going to be able to get um, repetitions like a civilian would get a professional competition shooter. One of the things that we've seen on our channel, Walsh is our main content creator. Started off like not really a gun guy, and he had this series, he called it Zero to YouTube Hero, and the idea was, can you learn to be a proficient shooter just from watching YouTube videos
Hmm.
and then practicing whatever was taught? So he did something like drawing from the holster like 5,000 times over a week, and then he got a Mantis system, like a laser training system,
Yep.
5,000 drills with that in a week. And out of the four of us on the team, he's probably the best pistol shooter of the team now. But he
Yeah.
put a lot of that dedication in that you're talking about into perfecting that, because it was something that he knew he wanted to be good at, and he had the time for it, and he had the drive and the passion to make that happen. And I think something that I see in all aspects of life, if you lack if you lack the knowledge to do something, right, and you probably see this as an instructor, if someone doesn't know how to hold a gun correctly, that's fixable, right? We could teach you
Yep.
how to do that. But if someone is unwilling to change maybe a bad habit that they have, no amount of instructing in the world is going to change a person's lack of willingness to try to be better. So
Absolutely.
it's interesting that I'm I guess I'm not really surprised that you've seen similar aspects in your job of training people. I guess it's kind of confirmation bias now that I think about it. So one of the videos that you had on your channel was something like how competition shooting can bridge the gap with real life scenarios. And I'm probably butchering the title of your YouTube video majorly. I apologize for that. But can you talk a little bit about your experience on how you've seen the benefits of training competitively and how that bridges the gap to real world scenarios that people might see in their life?
Absolutely. When we take the fundamentals of shooting, practical shooting is what I call it, and we go to the baseline of what is practical shooting. Practical shooting, whether it's self defense, law enforcement, military, competition, hunting, all of those things I consider practical shooting. It is fundamentally the ability to put the desired level of accuracy, whatever that is, whatever the standard is, the desired level of accuracy as quickly as possible. That is the goal. Okay, so if you look at competition, yeah, it's timed. It's maybe a speed course of fire, but we have an accuracy standard, and you're trying to do it as quickly as possible. When you get into law enforcement or self-defense shootings, speed matters. Like time matters. Every millisecond matters and accuracy matters. So when you understand at a fundamental level that all practical shooting consists of time and accuracy, then when we start to put those things into practice, whether it's competition, training for law enforcement, training for military, then it's going to take the bar to a higher level. So competition is the best way to do that. It puts you under pressure. It puts you under a time constraint. It forces you to constantly think on the move. Like critical thinking in competition is a big part of it. Now, are you going to have the opportunity to stage plan a search warrant? Not necessarily. Although I can tell you from the hundreds of search warrants I did, there were many times where we had an accurate layout of a house that we would do a tape house, and people are like, oh,
Mhm.
you never get to stage plan a real life situation. Well, actually, you do. Sometimes you do.
Yeah.
In the law enforcement and the military side, if you know where you're going to hit, you know where you're going, you may have an inside view of that, and you're going to guess what? If you have that intel, you're going to do stage plans. You're going to do
Yeah.
walkthroughs on it.
Yeah.
And sure, things may be changed. Like there was one that we did that we had a refrigerator in front of the door that we were breaching. Well, guess what? That changes things
Yeah.
because now your entry is all kinds of jacked up. So you have to be prepared for that. Competition, I can tell you the years I've done competition, the years that I did law enforcement, there was never a single situation in law enforcement that was not benefited from competition. There was not a single time that I was like, oh, geez, this competition thing is going to get me hurt, right? I
Yeah.
was only a benefit to my team when it came to anything like that. So I think a lot of the people who say otherwise, who say competition is not going to help you in real world situations, going to get you killed in the streets.
Hmm.
It's because of an ego issue, and I would challenge anyone. I'll have a live conversation with anybody and say, hey, go out and shoot some matches. The best shooters in the world are competition shooters. The best military and law enforcement shooters in the world also shoot competitions.
Mm.
So, for instance, I have 20 dudes out here this week. They are solid shooters. They are the tip of the spear, if you will. Okay? The best ones out of the group, about a third of the group, shoots competitions as well. And they are significantly more advanced than everyone else there.
Yeah.
Not because they've had more training in the military. They're all similarly trained. Some of them are new guys on the team. And that being said, they're still better shooters. Now, they may not have the experience, they may not have the number of direct action deployments as the other guys. However, their shooting ability, their manipulations, their ability to put rounds on target far surpasses even some of the senior guys on the team who don't shoot competition. And that is across the board. I've seen it in every industry, whether it's law enforcement, SWAT teams, military, big Army, big Navy, or special operations. Like every aspect of actual professionals that do competition in addition to their work are going to be significantly better than people who just do the work stuff.
I'm curious. It was one of the things you just said when you were kind of going through a list of folks that you've trained. Have you seen that? I guess the more experience. I hate using that word. The more experience that a group might have in terms of deployments, or if you're talking law enforcement, maybe search warrants or drug busts, are those groups typically? Are you battling ego when you're training people like that?
Always battling ego, no matter what group it is.
Okay.
Now, I've got competitors that are in the absolute. You got Delta and SEAL Team 6 and the pinnacle, right? Um, and the guys who are the top of those groups
Hmm.
in the shooting realm also compete. But 100% there's ego. And from the rookie police officer to somebody who's been on a team for forever, um, and this is what really pushes people away from competition in the professional industries, is the ego side, because they're like, hey, I carry a gun on the daily,
Yeah.
in full view of everyone else. I go on missions, I go do this and that, I do all the cool shit, and then I go to a competition at the local range on Saturday, and a 15-year-old girl kicks my ass.
Yeah.
That is embarrassing, and it hurts the ego. And if you
Mhm.
can, and the small percentage of guys who are willing to go get that for the first time, and B, once they do have their ego injured, are willing to like take that injury and say, screw that. Like I want to do better. That's
Yeah.
a highlight of my issues. I need to go put work in to make sure that I'm not getting beat by a 15-year-old girl. Those are a very small percentage of people that are willing to go put the work in afterwards, after
Mm.
their ego gets bruised.
Interesting.
That small percentage are the ones who are going to excel in
Yeah.
both work and competition. A great example, Craig Bellamy. He's the commander for the Houston Police Department SWAT team. You'd never know it meeting. Tall guy, big happy dude, but he's running a 85-man two
Wow.
team full time SWAT team, right? One of the busiest SWAT teams in the country, if not the world. And he's out there competing and putting his ego aside. He came and took a class with me last year, and freaking phenomenal dude with zero ego, like, or a very very low
Yeah.
ego, willing to put the
Yeah.
ego aside to actually learn and put work in. And he's at the top, right? And I
Mm.
have the utmost respect for the guy.
Yeah.
So that's the type of people that I want to surround myself with, first of all, and that's the type of people that I want to create in our space if possible.
Now, in your job, since you've been training, is battling that ego like the hardest aspect of what you have to do?
It is something that I have to take into consideration. Now, I wouldn't say it's the hardest aspect. I don't consider my job an incredibly hard job. I think the back end of it is actually the harder part. The maintaining the schedule, the booking
The
the
paperwork.
trips, filming classes, all of that.
Yeah.
The admin side is the hard part. Once I get on the range and teaching, Um, I will tell you when as a newer instructor, the first time I was teaching, an agency outside of my own or a unit outside of my own, there is definitely a intimidation factor. And as an instructor, stepping in front of 20 very experienced, very capable dudes
Hmm.
who are alpha type, who could absolutely do what's necessary to get the job done, to step in front of them and say, hey, I've got something for you guys, listen up. It is a fine line to walk.
Yeah.
And I still get an adrenaline rush doing that. Like I thoroughly enjoy teaching. And especially in a class like what I'm doing this week and what I do, around the country is most of those guys don't know who I am. They have no idea who I am. I'm just, hey, we got this guy coming in to teach us, and they show up with a, okay, well, what the hell are you going to teach me?
Yeah.
Um, and you have to approach that, and this is kind of a tip for any instructors that are watching this. You have to approach that with an air of humility and ability. Okay, you can't walk up there like, hey, I'm a badass, and you guys better listen up because I'm about to teach you something like that. You are going to get shut down so fast.
Yeah.
So for what I found that works really well for me is humility and ability. If they don't have your reputation, if they aren't like expecting you to be like God's greatest gift to the shooting community, then you better walk in there with some humility because otherwise you're going to rub everyone the wrong way. But at the same time, with humility, you have to have the ability to one, and this is going into some instructor like techniques. You have to be able to perform on a skills foundation, right? If I can't go do what I'm asking you to do, then you lost all respect for me.
Sure.
You also have to be able to communicate. If you can't carry on a conversation, whether it's just small talk on the side while people are shooting or answer questions, if you can't carry on a conversation, you're going to lose people's interest really quickly. And three, and one of the most important things I think is overlooked, because a lot of people have the skill and a lot of people have communication. Some people don't have both. But the third thing that I think is incredibly crucial is you have to have the ability to transfer knowledge. And I've been in classes personally. I've talked to many students who have been in classes where they're like, hey, this guy was a great storyteller and he could go up there and burn out of time, but I didn't learn shit from the class.
Yeah.
And it's like you have to know how to create a class that's going to deliver information that is consumable by the student and do it in such a way that they can understand it and take it home and actually improve.
Mm.
So that's my biggest goal. Is like I work on my shooting, so I have the skill side. I work on my communication, and then I work on my delivery techniques. And whether it's the drills that I pick, whether it's the way that I lay out a class, whether it's how I do personalized coaching for each shooter, those are all things that I'm constantly trying to get better at.
Yeah. Well, I love that thought process too of doing it in a way that I loved how you said it being consumable by the student, right? Because I I think and I don't know, I've never taught firearms, but it would seem that it's not a one size fits all for everybody. And
Absolutely.
so uh, I guess having the wherewithal to realize that and to say, okay, this person's not catching on to what I'm teaching. I got to know how to pivot almost immediately to be able to teach them more effectively. And it's great that you have the wherewithal and the knowledge of how to do that and when to do that. And I think to the law enforcement side, we've talked about uh, friends of I have talked about. If you're in an interview with someone, you're talking to a subject of a crime, and you just realize that the primary is not building rapport, but he's building rapport with the note taker. You need to be ready to pivot on the dot, let the note taker become primary, and you be quiet and you start taking notes. And I
Absolutely.
think it comes down to what you were talking about before too, of being humble enough, having that humility to be able to say, okay, I realize like I'm not going to win this game. I got to pass it over to my partner here. In your experience and with what you've seen on the training side, what would you say is a thing that people get wrong the most when it comes to firearms instructing?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think the one of the number one things that a lot of instructors, there's so many instructors out there. Probably the number one thing is they worship themselves, and they
Mm.
sit in an echo chamber of, hey, I got this from whoever I was teaching from, and they stop growing. So
Yeah.
a good instructor, any good instructor out there, is going to be doing things to better him or herself. Whether it's taking more classes, I still take classes. I love to take classes when I have the opportunity to. I try to take 1 to 2 classes a year,
Yeah.
and it may not be with a better shooter than I am. Okay,
Sure.
but it's somebody that I'm going to look up to, and it's a way to gather new ways to think about things. If they're not competing, I think that's a red flag. Now there are different levels of shooter of instructor. You got your concealed carry. I do 50 courses a year, one every weekend. Instructor that they're teaching a 4 hour basic pistol course. That does not require a lot of skill to do.
Sure.
Okay, and a lot of that is just get the fundamentals. But if you're looking for actual advancement in your skill set, you should be looking for an instructor who is putting out information on the internet. If they have a social media, I think that's a big key point. If they don't post, if they post nothing but flashy shooting videos, then that's a issue to me. I want to see what it
Yeah.
is that you're teaching. That's a quick way for me to gauge. Hey, this guy's actually putting what he has to teach on the internet, and there's a lot of BS on the internet. There's a lot
Sure.
of bad instruction on there, and they get called out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if you see an instructor on the social media that has their comments disabled, that is a major red flag. But as far as instruction goes, I think one of the biggest issues for most instructors is they are not actually developing themselves, and they're not working on growing themselves. So it's like they learn this from somebody who learned it from somebody who learned it from somebody. I call it institutional inbreeding. Okay, and
Yeah.
we see this in law enforcement all the time. We see it in the military all the time. Institutional inbreeding is the guy who took a class from the firearms instructor of the agency, who took a class from the firearms instructor from the agency, who took a class from the firearms instructor from the agency, and it's now 3 generations down through the agency. And maybe it's only 15 years, but those progressions are the same, and they're not actually getting any outside influence. And that's where
Yeah.
I come in. A lot of the classes that I do are instructor development courses. And it's like, hey, we want you to come in and give our instructor cadre a whole new way to, at least some new blood, new information, new way to think about things, new drills to run.
Sure.
Because when you go to a lot of these agencies, like, hey, why do we do this drill? Well, it's because it's how we've always done it. Well,
Yeah.
that's not the right answer. If you can't explain how you do it, and one of the things that I lead every class with, especially experienced shooters, is you may have done things a long time this particular way, and I'm not going to try to change anything in particular, but I'm going to tell you, when we look at what we're doing, if there's a technique or a piece of gear that makes you more accurate, faster, and more consistent, I don't care what the old technique is or how it makes you feel. The feelings don't matter. It's the
Yeah.
performance that counts.
Yeah.
So look at the performance. Put the time in to see if it's faster. Put the time in to see if it's more accurate, and then put the time in to see if it's more consistent, and then adopt it. If
Yeah. I
it
love
doesn't
that.
add up to any of those, then we throw it in the bucket and move on. If it doesn't affect any of those, it's a personal preference issue. So if you like red mags and I like blue mags, well, guess
Yeah.
what? It doesn't change any of the performance metrics that we're doing. So it's a personal preference, and it gets rid of all the arguments.
Yeah. We had a qual last month, I think, and one of the old timers, guys set to retire. I think end of this month, maybe in the next month. But he's still shooting with, like, I think they call it the teacup, like
Yep,
cup in his hand and like putting the base plate in his hand. And
classic.
I like smacked one of my coworkers, like, "Hey, what the heck is he doing?" But I think it's just someone that has 20 plus years of that drilled into their head, and maybe there hasn't been an instructor that's been brave enough to tell the head honcho, "Hey, you're shooting wrong." So it's just gone uncorrected for 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's interesting for me to see stuff like that. But again, I'm not. I'm not an instructor, so I'm not out there interacting with people on the regular. Um, as an instructor, what's one thing that I guess you would say surprises you the most about the folks that you're teaching that they're getting correct? Like they come to the class and they already have some knowledge or some skill that um, happily surprises you that you don't have to breach that subject.
I think more and more lately, it's been the issue of pinning the trigger. That was something that I saw a ton in law enforcement and military. When we're trying to, when they're trying to take accurate shot, they take a shot, keep the trigger pinned, the recoil cycles, it settles back onto the target. They slowly release the trigger, hear a click, and then they take another shot. It's called click banging. That's a term coined by JJ Ricazza. And clickbaiting was taught in mass for many, many years. And it's finally cycling out of a lot of areas. I still see it from time to time, but more and more people are like, yeah, this is absolutely not the right way to do it. And I'm happy to see it when it happens. Like today, today was day one of this class, and nobody was doing that, and it just made me really happy because normally there's at least 4 or 5 guys that are still doing that, and we have to take the time to explain why you don't want to do that. We have to demo the reasons and the proof behind why it's a terrible idea. And then I have to talk about why it was taught in the first place, and the whole purpose of that was to force people to slow down enough to actually pay attention to their sights, and it's not necessary.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that when I see that people aren't doing that, it makes me happy. The other thing that I see a lot is people that are dry firing stand out, and there are a few influences in this industry who have really contributed that. Lucas Botkin is one of them with T-Rex Arms. He's attacked the younger generation.
Yeah.
And attack is not a good word. He's influenced a younger generation, and so as I see new officers coming in or new guys in the military coming in, especially these new guys on the team who they grew up in the YouTube era. Some of these guys they were born in 2000, dude. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
2001, 2002, 2000. Like, how are you born in 2003 and now you're on the SWAT team? Like that's crazy, bro.
Yeah.
So, but these guys they grew up on YouTube, and that's always been there for them, and so they've adopted a lot of these things that high level shooters would be doing, and they're doing it from the get go. And
Yeah.
so as a new guy coming onto a team, they're already outperforming the manipulations and even the shooting over a lot of other guys,
Hmm.
and it sets them ahead. So I can really spot people who are already putting in work at home, and you can tell when it's been influenced by the internet. And I think that's really cool. That means we're doing our job.
Yeah, I love that. I love dry fire personally, and it's something that I think it was John Lovell. I watched a video of his, and I still do this to this day. That I alternate between usually an appendix carry holster or a hip holster,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what I'm doing for the job. And so, if I know I'm going to be, let's say, having a hip holster for the next couple weeks, um, I will make sure my gun's empty, but I will stand in a corner, a safe spot in my house, and I'll just draw and aim in on the corner a couple times. And then it's picking objects in the room, right? Okay, I'm going to draw, I'm going to whiteboard, picture, TV, right? And so this transition, all that was stuff that I learned on YouTube, that I watched on YouTube.
Yep.
Um, and it's interesting because I've seen the benefits of it, and to hear I've talked to competitive shooters before that talk about the benefits of dry fire, but there's some big, kind of going back to one of my original questions, there's some big names from the military, special forces side that have talked about how dry fire is the worst thing that you can do because it puts bad habits into you, um and and I think they're doing more of a disservice than anything else.
Absolutely. I will tell you, any big name in shooting that's actually able to perform is going to encourage dry fire, 100%. And any competitor is going to tell you that dry fire is going to make a big impact. when I was in law enforcement full time, I every day that I put my belt on to go to work, and I bounced around too. I wore and I did the dreaded sin of crossing platforms. So I shot, I would shoot an M&P for competition, and then I would shoot a Glock for work, or I would shoot a
Yeah.
staccato, or actually, yes, it was STI at the time for competition. I would shoot a Glock for work. I would shoot an Atlas for competition. I would shoot a Glock for work. And so what I would do is every time I put my Glock on to go to work, or my concealed on to go to work, I would dry fire, and it wouldn't be a long dry fire session, but every time I throw that belt on, unless I was like, hey, we got a SWAT call out, we got a freaking haul ass, it was like, hey,
Yeah.
throw the belt on. I'll do 5 draws. Okay? 5 draws just to make sure my level 3 is comfortable. And that made me it got me to the point where if I was in a foot chase, I wouldn't have to think about pulling my gun. It just came out. Like I would be
Yeah.
running and my gun's in my hand. How did it get there? Well, I didn't have to think about it. It was just there.
Yeah.
Somebody
Yeah. That
starts
muscle
running at
memory.
me. My gun's in my hand because I don't have to think about it. It's not like oh shit, like how do I get this hood down? It's
Right.
this is what it's supposed to be. And dry fire is crucial to that. And anybody who argues against dry fire is a fraud. And I have no problem with saying that. I will have an argument with anybody any day of the
Yeah.
week because I can
I
show you
I'm not dropping the name of the
scientific
person.
study about Olympic athletes who do visualization and or dry runs of every sport out there.
Hmm.
And, I mean, go ask Michael Jordan if he does free throws and whether he does it visualization or if he only does it in the game. Like it's
Yeah.
ridiculous to
Well, and
think
it's interesting because you see that in the games too, where before they're given the ball at the free throw, right? They're standing there. Okay. Yep. Try to
Yep.
get the angle right, and then they get the ball in their hand and they do it. When I again not being in this world, the competitive shooting world at all. One of the guys I did jujitsu with was recently he just recently retired, but I don't know what program he competes in, but he's pretty good. He teaches here locally. So I heard this retired special forces guy say how dry fire's terrible, and so I was the next jujitsu practice. I go, hey man, I heard this. Like, what are your thoughts? And he was like, pretty much the same thing as you. Like, he was very nice about it, like not calling the guy a moron, but he was
I'll call him a
like,
moron.
no,
I have no
I
problem with
dry fire. He's like, I dry fire every day. Now, the basic argument that the guy was making is you're in a dry fire, or if you're training with a laser, you're going to have to click and then rack the slide. And the thought process that he was saying is, if you got into a real life scenario, you might pull the trigger, and then instead of have a follow up shot, you're going to rack the slide. So that's why he says you shouldn't dry fire. And this buddy of mine that shoots competitively said, yeah, I mean maybe, but there's ways around that where he might dry fire a couple times, put the gun down, walk away from it, come back, get back into his dry fire routine. But far and away, the competitive shooters that I've listened to have basically said the same thing as you. No, it's very beneficial. There's scientific studies behind it. You can see the benefits of it, of
Yeah.
people
Well,
doing
and
that.
I would challenge that even with any other sport out there. Jiu-jitsu and MMA type stuff is a great example of it. That would be like saying the only beneficial training would be if you're full contact sparring. That means no working manipulations, no
Hmm.
working techniques. You can only full contact spar or street fight. Street fight is
Yeah.
the only way to actually get good at fight. Like bullshit. Like
Right.
there are things that you can do to get better, and if you think that you have to be full contact sparring, then you're wrong. And
Yeah.
I have no problem with calling out the BS when I see it.
And this question kind of, I guess, a comment and then a question that ties into something that I'm curious your take on, which is red dots on either duty or EDC pistols. But we in my agency, it's not allowed right now, but they're talking about possibly getting the Gen 5 MOS, and our nationwide firearms instructors have a couple Gen 5s and some optics they're kind of teasing. And so at our recent qual, the head honcho, they had him run through the qual. First time he's ever shot with a red dot, and it was just it's this old timer, like, I don't like this. It's not what I'm used to. But
The,
again,
the
going back
decupping
to,
guy.
yeah, the cupping guy. So,
Yeah.
going back to one of the things that Walsh talked about, and I love this idea because I don't have one on my duty gun, but my personal EDC, I do have a red dot on. And one of the things that Walsh talked about in his Zero to YouTube Hero series was drawing from the holster, and the reward is pulling the trigger. Right,
Mm-hmm.
that's you're not allowed to pull the trigger until you have good sight picture. And so it got to the point after 5,000 iterations of drawing from the holster that he can draw from the holster at almost any point and have a good sight picture. He can see the dot. The reward is pulling the trigger. What's your take on red dots, whether on a law enforcement duty pistol or on your everyday carry? Is that a good thing to do? A bad thing? It depends.
So I will tell you, it is the way of the future, and it's happening now. More and more and more agencies are going to red dots. Almost every specialized special operations unit is going to red dots. In fact, the 20 dudes I have in this class, they're all running red dots, every single one of them. And this it's great. I remember, shoot, probably 6 or 7 years ago when I would teach a class, I might have one or two guys running red dots.
Okay.
And now I have maybe one or two guys not running a red dot.
Hmm.
And it's because it's more effective. It truly is faster. It is more accurate. It's more consistent. Now, the what is the there? I would say there are really three drawbacks to running a red dot, and I talk about this. I have red dot instructor courses that I'll talk about this. All right, the three drawbacks to it. Number one, what is the number one drawback to running a red dot?
Um,
What
I
do you think?
guess if you're trying to, oh man, I don't know. I'll tell you, the hardest thing for me when I first switched over was transitioning my brain to not look for iron sights and to look for the dot. I
Okay.
don't know how I would translate that into, what that problem would be with red dot, but I guess uh, obtaining sight picture.
Updating a sight picture. That is the number one issue with the red dot is finding the dot in the first place.
Okay.
Okay. So when people want to argue, hey, red dot will make you slower, it's that number one, they haven't put the work in. Okay. And let me just grab this real quick. When I when I teach a class or teach anything with red dot, the first thing that we're going to talk about is developing that natural point of aim of some sort. Okay. Make sure this is all cleared out. First rule of dry fire: make sure everything's dry.
Yeah.
That's the number one rule of dry fire. So when we talk red dots, the biggest issue with red dot is when people come up here, they draw, and they're doing this.
Mm,
Oh, there it is. Got it. Okay. And that's what takes up the time. So the problem is people are also doing that with iron sights, but they don't realize it because they see when they bring the gun up to their line of sight, they see the reference points, so they can make the
yeah.
adjustments as necessary. When you have a red dot and the red dot's not in the screen, you don't see the reference points. So you already have a jacked up presentation. We just need to correct that.
Yeah.
So the best way that I've found to do that is no target in sight. I'm not worried about target. I'm worried about the relationship between the front sight, the rear sight in your eyeball, or the red dot in your eyeball. And so what we do is get online, close your eyes, draw, and open your eyes. And then your goal is that every single time I open my eyes, that red dot is perfectly in the center of my screen. If it's not there, we need to do the dry fire reps to make it there. And how do we do that? It's not just like, oh, it's not there, let me throw it back in my holster and redo it. It is open my eyes, hey, the dot's not there, let me make a correction. Ah, there it is. Log how that feels. And it's intentional. And it's boring.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not fun. It's not like an exciting drill to do.
Right.
But you have to log how that feels and then replicate it and replicate it and replicate it and replicate it until you can't screw it up. And that
Yeah.
takes out the number one issue of red dots. The two other issues are battery life, which most modern red dots, you've got 50,000 hour battery life plus,
Yeah.
which is, change your battery every year. guess what? If you can't remember to change your battery every year, you probably shouldn't be a professional with a gun.
Right.
Okay. Number two is mechanical issues. The dot coming loose, screws breaking. Well, guess what? Iron sights have that as well. It's not as common,
Yeah.
but it can happen. If you torque the screws properly, if you're using a factory optics plate, if you're not changing things, then it's not going to be an issue. One of the big issues that I see, if somebody breaks the screws off, I had one in my class today, break the screws off of his optic. The optic came back and hit him in the face. Kind of entertaining, but it's also unfortunate.
Yeah.
If your screws shear off, I would say 90% of the time, when I ask them, hey, did you torque those screws to spec? They're like, no, I just like torqued it. I'm like, there's
Yeah.
your problem. They have a spec. If you over torque them and you put extra tension on the screw in that slide, as that recoil is happening, with the extra tension on that screw, it's going to snap it.
Oh man,
Because
Walsh is gonna love hearing that. We have two guys on our team. Walsh is I've talked about before, and he's big into, you know, he gets angry if a manufacturer doesn't list whatever the torque spec should be for anything, scope
yeah,
mounts, red dot mounts, and then you have the other guy who's exactly like you're talking about. He's like, no, I got a built-in torque wrench right here, right, two ugga and it's good to go. And I think part of it is if you've never experienced a failure, then why are you going to change what you've been doing? Right? It's always
yeah.
worked, so why am I going to change it? Kind of going back to these issues that we've talked about with people. It's the way we've always done it. Why are we going to change it? Um, so Walsh is going to love hearing that. Torque
Well,
torque the red
I've
dots to
seen
spec.
many failures. I've experienced way more failures than I care to share, but I can tell you that when it comes to factory specs on torque, I highly recommend following those because
Yeah,
even on the side of a scope mount, it seems like it's just on the receiver. Well, guess what? It makes a difference, and
yeah,
there's a reason why they have it torqued to spec or have it a spec for that. Because if you over torque it or under torque it, you're going to have issues.
yeah. Well, and I think this kind of highlights the importance of having an instructor that has this type of experience, this type of knowledge base that you have, because people, like my buddy might say, I've never had that experience, so why am I going to change? Well, yeah, you're also shooting 4 times a year. You're
Yeah.
not shooting multiple times a week to see that amount of stress. So yeah, your optic might fail 4 years from now, but if you were shooting competitively or if you were shooting weekly, you might have experienced that 75% faster.
Yep.
um,
Well, and I have an added bonus. Like I have several relationships, sponsor slash partner relationships in the shooting space where one of the value adds that I'm able to bring to the table is I shoot more than most people, like significantly more than most people. In a training week like this week, or actually really over the next 3 weeks, I'm training 17 days over through the next 3 weeks.
Goodness.
And that's with travel back and forth
Yeah.
across the country as well. So I'll be on the range a lot. Over the next 3 weeks, I will probably go through um, at least 20,000 rounds,
Yeah.
which
Golly.
is more than most people will shoot in a year or
Oh
two.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's more than most people shoot in 3 years, 4 years.
Yeah. Maybe even a
So
lifetime.
yeah, exactly. So when you put that much repetition on any platform, you're gonna find the failure points.
Yeah.
And so the companies that I partner with, if I'm going to test something, if they have a new product, they send it to me to try out to see, hey, is there an issue here? And it's kind of fun because I get to play with things beforehand, and
Right.
I also get to R&D things. But I find those breaking points, and I'm like, hey, this is where we need to fix something, or this is an issue that we have, or no, this thing is freaking awesome. Keep doing
Yeah.
this, right? Because if I can, I can put 10,000 rounds on a rifle without lubing it but one time. Guess what? That lubrication is pretty freaking solid,
Yeah.
right? So that's the benefit of getting to shoot a whole lot.
Well, okay. So I know it's getting late for you. We've been at this for almost an hour. I have kind of a personal question based on one of the things I just saw. It looked like as kind of an optic geek, it looked like you had one of those Vortex Defenders.
Hmm.
How do you like that optic? Because I've been thinking about putting one on my ADC.
It's been solid. So I run the Vortex. I've had the Vortex Defender CCW for 2 years now. Whenever they first released it, before they first released it, I was playing with that.
Okay.
And then the new one, the Defender ST, they
Okay.
just released this a couple months ago, and it has been very solid. I really like it. I've got many thousands of rounds on it now, zero issues whatsoever. Beat the hell out of it, and 100%. I'm a fan. It's their best pistol optic they've released yet by far. And
Okay.
I've been running Vortex stuff for many years now. They're one of the companies that I partnered with, and I've run Vortex Optics even before I was partnered with them. I love
Yeah.
their company. I love the optics, and this is by far the best dot they've dropped yet.
Cool. Very cool. Well, Joe, man, I appreciate the time that you've given with us. Like I said, we're coming up on an hour now, and I know you're in travel mode. It's late for you, but where can people find out more information about you? I mentioned your YouTube channel, but I've seen you on other social medias as well. So where can people find you?
I am most active on Instagram and YouTube.
Okay.
Instagram is probably the best place you can reach out to me there. It's Joe_Farewell. And then I also have a couple different websites. My primary one is the dryfiremastery.com, and that's where I have multiple courses. So I have everything from a handgun foundations course, an intro to competition course that I just released let's see, 2 weeks ago. And that's like if you've never shot a match and you're thinking about getting into competition, you're not sure how, like that's what this course is about. It's like, how do we find matches? How do we show up to a match? And like, what are the rules that would get me DQ'd if I showed up to a match, right? If
Yeah.
you know nothing, like this is the great place to start. I have a multi-gun course. If you're into 3-gun, I have a course for competition handgun that's like a master class on everything. We got over 50 drills there, over 80 videos that take you through competition. Like everything you need to know about competition. If you're interested in getting into handgun competitions, that's where it's at. So I put a lot of time and effort into those courses to make it consumable from home without having to use ammo, and make it accessible to a lot of people who don't have access to a good instructor or to a range that they can go out and just practice at all the time. If they don't have the budget for a whole bunch of ammo,
Yeah.
this is the best way to do that.
Yeah. I
And
love
it
that.
will keep you from doing it because you can dry fire wrong. Like you can practice wrong, you can train wrong, you can create bad habits. So this is how you create a process based training program that's going to help you actually make a difference in your shooting and make a good difference in your shooting. That's dryfiremastery.com. Then I also have Farewell Firearms Training, or it's farewellfirearms.com. That's where I post my classes, my events. I have a big event coming up in July, the Independence Range Day, that we're going to be posting on there soon. And then the Winter Paradise Summit is a 3-day training event I do in Florida every year, which is kind of a close knit group of people that get 3 instructors for 3 days, and it's freaking awesome.
Nice.
So that's where you can find me. And then, feel free to hit me up anytime on any of those platforms with any questions that you have. And I love doing this. I love having conversations. I love helping people with their shooting stuff.
Well, man, I appreciate you again taking time and sharing your time with us. Um, and that's it for me though, man. I don't have any other questions. I Some of them that I had set up that I was going to ask you, you already kind of deviated and answered them for me. So I appreciate that, man. Great
Absolutely.
great
Thanks.
time great time having you on here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the invite. And whoever it was that sent me to Jason, thank you guys for that. I appreciate you all.
He's a Southern guy. His name in our Discord is Cajun.
Cajun.
I think he's from Louisiana.
Okay.
Yeah. But I told him that I hit you up and that we were going to have you on. So
That's
yeah, and again, Walsh is a huge fan, so we got to get together someday and have some fun shooting.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me know when you guys want to go to Red Dots, and I'll come up and train the agency.
Okay, all right, man. Thanks, Joe.
All right,
Appreciate it,
guys.
man.
Take care.